So my name's Crystal, and today we're doing a little virtual studio visit with Erica Licea-Kane. A little interesting thing that we're going to change up today. Erica's actually not in her studio, she's in her home. And that's because her Wi-Fi isn't very good or existent in her studio, and her studio is being moved. So she's in a bit of a
I'm upside
situation.
down.
Yeah, you're upside
down right now.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a little change of pace from that. So I believe this is the third studio visit we've done. And it's part of a series that we're doing now because of socially distancing practices. Just a way to connect everyone together. And it's just been really successful and really just like a fun thing to do on a Wednesday evening. And in addition to that, we've been developing our Artsy page. And I believe that link is shared with everybody. So you can check out Erica's work on her Artsy page. We've been doing shows through Artsy as well. So super fun online exhibitions that are happening. So Erica and I actually spoke together last week. And I got to know a little bit more about her and her practice and her evolution of her practice. So I've made some questions to help kind of direct us. And we've also provided a slideshow, which I will pull up in just a minute. So all of the questions that I have brought together to kind of start the conversation are just a reflection of what I've gleaned from Erica thus far. And of course, during the process or especially at the end, if you have any other questions for Erica, I'm sure that she's very glad to answer them. So let me
also, don't hesitate to ask me questions while I'm talking. That's fine.
Yeah.
You know, so we can have, so this isn't totally static, you know?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So let's get started with the presentation that Erica has lovingly made. Does everyone see that? You can just do a little quick head nod. Okay, so let me see.
So the way I have this set up is I have it set up with older work first, just to give you a little bit of visual chronology as to, you know, how I arrived at what I'm doing now. And one of the things that Crystal and I talked a lot about was my childhood and my background.
Yep, that was going to be the question.
How that, you know, how that really fueled what I do now, you know. So if we go to the first slide, I'll kind of, you know, I'm going to try to do this so that we're not here until tomorrow morning. You know what I mean? I'm going to try to, you know, but basically, you know, my childhood, my parents are both professional artists. So I grew up with a lot of art, you know, and it was, you know, very perfectly normal to me. And also to watch them being makers. My father was an illustrator. My mother was a sculptor. Why don't we go back to that first image? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, you know, there was always something being made in the house. There were always art magazines lying around, American craft magazines. They were Craft Horizons then, lying around. So at a really early age, I really developed this love for textile and fibers. And I spent a lot of time in fabric stores with my mother because she was always sewing. And that was out of, you know, financial necessity, you know. And so it was at a very early age that I learned about the nuances of fabric, you know, the weaves, how fabric are basically visual transparencies. And so, you know, it was very much a part of my upbringing and very much a part of my Italian heritage. You know, my grandmother sewed, there was bobbin lace in the house. There was all that stuff was just very much a part of, you know, where I come from. My mother was a sculptor, as I mentioned before, and one of the founding members of the Kingston Gallery in New York, which was, and I don't even know if it's still open, but it was a cooperative back in the 70s. So that's kind of where I come from, you know. So then I get to Parsons, where I went to undergraduate school. I went in there thinking I was going to be a graphic designer and then switched into the fiber program, being inspired by Beatrice Wood, who's kind of a well-known ceramic artist. And I had a chance to hear her speak, and I thought she was fabulous. And I always loved fabric, and I spent a lot of time embroidering as a kid and making stuff. And so that was really the kind of where I was coming from. So I switched into the fiber program at Parsons, and was of the first graduating class. You know, I was there, we were there, and then the looms came in after us. So anyway, up until about about 2000, I was actually weaving my fabric. And Crystal, just jump in if you have a question.
Well, I was going to let you
Okay.
get into it, because I was going to ask
Okay.
how did painting come into play, but I'm interested to hear a little bit of this backstory too.
Okay. Well, you know, I've always responded to mixed media. You know, I never really saw my sort of textile background in a more utilitarian way. And when you're in fiber training, you know, you learn all the on loom techniques, dyeing, resist, paper making, felt making, bobbin lacing, all that stuff is part of a textile fiber program. But I always naturally gravitated towards mixing media. It just was something that was just sort of inherent. And I'm very much an additive artist. You know, I have to put things together to make a whole. And so, you know, the work sort of evolved, you know, from dyeing fabric to machine sewing to this body of work where I was weaving fabric, assembling it together, stapling it on a wall, stiffening it, and then painting on top of it. So this whole period, which was over 10 years, I called these my painted tapestries. And in this particular piece, this piece is about 40 by 40, and it's quite heavy. And these pieces hang with Velcro. So the Velcro was built into the basic layer. And this is a waffle weave, which is a dimensional weave that literally makes like a waffle, and of course Anne would know this, a series of layers of squares. And so, you know, that's kind of where the current work is kind of coming from, this period of time.
Yeah, and that's super evident as we go through your work, especially chronologically. Also, too, Erica, let me know whenever you want me to change the slide.
Okay.
Or, you know, or if you want me just to go on naturally.
Okay. I think I'll let you know. I think
okay.
So I think we should switch the slide now, because
yeah.
We have a lot of images. So this is like sort of the next, this is 1999. You know, I'm still weaving my fabric. I'm poking holes in it. I'm still stiffening it on the wall, but in this case, I'm starting to couch. That spiral in there is couching, and couching is when you lay a thread or a piece of yarn onto the surface and then sew it down. And it basically gave me this ridge. And then I layered the surface with hand printed paper on rice paper. And so that's the patterning that you're seeing. And then I painted on top of that. So the pieces have always been multi-layered, and each part took a while to do. But I also, you know, I've also always been really interested in patterning, you know, which is really inherent to the loom. I mean, you can't weave without a repeat. You know, textile processes are very, very repeat oriented. And at this time, I was really starting to really chop into the edges also. I really wanted the edges of the work to have a life of their own.
So can I ask you who you were influenced? I mean, I feel like these are very painterly in so many ways. Who were your influences at the time? Were you looking at painting? Were you
always the artists that I've always looked at are Alberto Burri. I mean, he's my go-to guy, and Deep in Corn, and Lee Bonteque. I mean, I love Lee Bonteque's work, and so I always, at a very early age, I always found myself gravitating towards abstract painting. I mean, even now I go into a museum, I'm looking for the abstract paintings, you know.
Right.
And when I look at a realistic painting, when I look at Sargent's, you know, the Edward Darley Boyd, his daughters, you know, I'm seeing the strong diagonals and verticals and horizontals in that painting. So yes, I've always looked at painters, probably more so than fiber artists.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because these feel so painterly to me, unless you told me that they were in paint from on a slide, like looking at
Right.
a computer. It would be hard to know the difference.
And in some ways, they're more painterly than the current work I'm doing. I think. I mean, you know, the current work I'm doing, I think, is even more so informed by my textile, my fiber background than these pieces, even though I was weaving these.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that.
Yeah.
These are beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you. Why don't we switch to the next?
Sure.
And I have the dates there. So this is 2007. This is from this piece and the next piece are from the last show that I had in New York. I was showing at Denise Bibro Fine Art for about 17 years. And this was a body of work that I did. I'm already working on canvas, on hardboard at this point. And this was a show about my mother. She had died about 15 months before. And the whole show was about sort of dying imagery or altered, somewhat recognizable imagery. And I haven't done this really since or before, where the whole show is sort of leaves and birds and butterflies, and but it got very dark. And it was a huge impact, obviously, like when anybody loses their mother, it had a huge effect on me. So this piece is 30 by 30, and I call it Spine Vine. So this is, again, the couching and printed paper and then painted on top. So the ridges with the couching allowed me, when I hit it with paint later, allowed me to kind of bring out those lines later on. And you know, it's funny, since the show, I find myself thinking about, well, I should get something realistic in there. You know, it's like I never really let go of this, but I haven't really been able to do it since. I think we can go to the next one. And this is a little one. This is Fluttered, and this is 12 by 12. And obviously it's butterflies, and the butterflies become fragmented. So the dark lines that you're seeing are the couching, you know, are the couched yarn that creates that ridge.
And this is the same process as the previous slide?
Yeah, it is. It is. Okay. I mean, the pieces are evolving. You know, I'm no longer weaving my fabric. I couldn't stand it anymore. I couldn't stand the process of, you know, setting up the loom. I have a 60-inch 8-harness loom in my studio. And I just, you know, I didn't find a place for that anymore. I really wanted the work to be more direct, a little bit more immediate, although it's not. It all takes a long time, but I didn't want to have to deal with the weaving part. I think we can move on. So here it's pretty much the same process, except I'm starting to, you know, layer the surface more with the medium, and I'm starting to experiment with the medium itself, not so much painting on textured surface. You know, I think at this point I don't have a lot of fabric. Those other pieces had fabric as the base layers. So I'm starting to think more about not showing as much of the background and really playing with the color of the medium, which is like it's almost like frosting that I pigment and then I squeeze it through a pastry bag. So I'm still using a pastry bag.
Yes, I was going to ask, and this is kind of flowing into your more current work,
Right.
And that, you know, you can talk about it as we go through the slides, but what's the physical process of making your work, and you know, we're kind of seeing how it evolved over time, but just hearing you speak about it would be interesting too.
I think I'll talk more about it as I go on.
Yeah.
Especially with the new show. But here, you know, again, it's the medium is really becoming more of a wall, and you know, I'm really using it as a patterning device. And I started using the medium at first through just a Ziploc baggie, you know, that I just cut a corner out and squeeze, and then I discovered, you know, the pastry bag and the different size tips, and because I wanted visual pattern, but I wanted physical pattern also. You know, that was really important to me. And I wanted the edges, you know, I wanted the edges to be sort of a little bit irregular, you know, and when you see these, they're not, you know, they're not hard edge. I think we can go to the next one. So this is from a show that I had at NKG in Boston in 2012. And, you know, it's the same process. I'm just doing more and more, you know, with the medium, and, you know, there's that light grid on the surface. That's the couching. You know, I'm still kind of in that mode, you know, working. I think we can go on to the next one. This is from my first participation as an associate member at Kingston. And at this point, this is very small. This is 12 by 12. And at this point, I'm really just covering the background, but, you know, still going through the process of, you know, using fabric, gluing down printed paper, and going through the whole dance of doing this, but then covering it. And so this is when I started to think, you know, why am I doing that? And I realized that it was just probably a crutch. You know, I needed to jump through those hoops, you know, to get to where I wanted to be. So anyway, this is one of a pair. And you know, now I'm really starting to think about, well, let's not bother doing all that under stuff, you know. And then the next image was from, and I should have put a detail in here, was from the next associate show. And this one probably has, you know, 18 layers on it. You know, I went like whole hog on this one. You know, it's like, how far can I push this? How many more layers can I get on there? You know, while still establishing the under composition, keeping the values separate, keeping the grid in there. You know, how much can I possibly do? And there's a lot, and this is big. This piece is this piece is 40 by 60, so it's a very large piece, and it's very heavy. And so also at this time, I'm really thinking about, you know, do I want to work this large? I was having a hell of a time moving this thing around the studio. I mean, there's all kinds of things that come up when you're in the studio, you know, all kinds of, so the physicality of the work, you know, how does it feel? But it was quite an undertaking for me. Crystal, I think we can go to the next. Yeah. And then this is 2018. This is my first Project Space show. I'm now a full member at Kingston. And I did this, you know, after the larger show where I did these shaped pieces. And, you know, the work often feels like, you know, a map or a topographical view of a city. Often they look like, you know, aerial landscapes. But this particular body of work came from these studies that I were doing for my students. You know, I'm also a college professor. So I make prototypes for everything that I teach. And I was putting together pieces of cardboard to teach. I was doing an experimental printmaking class that I developed, and putting cardboard together to make a printing block. And I thought, how interesting, you know, if I put pieces of wood together, you know, and build these shaped pieces. And that's what this was, the beginning of that. So that's kind of the last of the older work. And does anybody have any questions right now before we move on?
Yeah, did you ever think of doing collagraphs and actually making prints in this kind of methodology?
You mean from this?
Well, from this, but like this. So did you ever think of building a flat surface out of cardboard, adding layers to it like you were doing for prototype for your class, and
Right.
actually turning these into actual prints yourself?
I haven't, I haven't. It's funny because my former colleague, Greg Gomez, who I taught with at Wheelock, used to tell me that. He used to tell me you should print from these, But
Yeah.
yeah, it's been mentioned. That has been mentioned, Myra.
Well, I think it's an interesting new thing. I think could be really interesting if you tried it. Anyhow, whatever.
That's interesting because I'm sort of at that, and I'll talk about that later. I'm kind of at that point where I'm thinking that, I need to move on, and I'm doing studies right now. So that's a really interesting comment.
I have a question, Erica.
Yes.
How much of this is actually sketched and planned?
That's a
I'm
good
always
question.
very intrigued as to, are you thinking about what your last layer is going to be when you start your first layer? Or is it pretty intuitive? Or do you plan the colors? Because what's really interesting to me is all the color relationships that you have.
Right. And that just, yeah, that's a really good question. And I have sort of a convoluted answer for you. I have this general idea of where I want to go with the piece. And I do a lot of sketches and I do a lot of studies. When I'm mixing new media together, I'll do a study. And then the beginning part of it is really very intuitive. I just kind of lay lines down to give myself a scaffolding. I realize I do a lot of scaffolding in my work. And then I build from there. And then as I'm building my layers, certain areas become concentrated. And then that becomes the design of the work.
But
Does that answer your question?
But I have an addition to that. But you're always working linearly. So
Yeah.
So that's, to me, they're more drawings than anything else.
Yeah, I guess I never think of it that way and I guess they are. I never think of that because I'm coming from this textile place,
Right. I mean, they're very textural and they look like fabric, and I could see them translate into fabric designs very easily. But in terms of the way you're working, you keep working with line on top of line on top of line. So for me, you're drawing on top of drawing on top of drawing.
It's true. It's an interesting way to think about it. I just never think of it that way. But because instead of using fabric, I'm actually making it, like a solid area is made up of lines or small parts.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost as if I crocheted a piece of fabric and glued it down.
Right.
But instead, I'm making it with lines.
Right.
Erica, one question I just thought of now, just relating to your, the physical process of making this work.
Right.
Do you ever feel like you need to look at something while you're making it? Because we've talked about some of your artistic inspirations, but do you ever feel like you need to kind of look at something to help you organize how it's going to play out?
Like what? Like other art or?
Other art, or if I'm making work, I look at photography I've taken and these look like maps to me. I think of Mark Bradford.
Oh yeah.
In this work. So and sometimes when I'm making paintings, I need to not just look at things for references, but look at things to help me kind of get into a mindset of entering in this space.
Well, I do. I find myself looking at rock formations. I mean, I'll often look at nature.
Okay.
Rock formations, tree patterns, landscapes. Yeah, occasionally I do.
Biology.
I don't, but that's interesting.
Hmm.
Because I do, when I teach, I have my students find images from nature, and they do a lot of work from nature. Because I always tell them nature is the best designer. You can't get any better than that.
Yeah.
But yeah, biology is certainly a wonderful visual resource. Chantal, did I answer your question? I'm not sure I answered your question.
Sorry, I'm also cooking.
That's
Yes,
okay.
you did
Did I
answer
answer your
my
question?
Yes, you did.
Okay, good. Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, what I got out of it is that you don't really sketch, you just kind of plan it as you go along.
Well, I sketch format, like overall composition. You know, I do think, I want this thing to be in 4 parts. You know, overall design structure, I do think about. But the work informs me as I go along. And the interesting thing about my work is that it often ends up the way I thought about it in the first place, but I get there in a really convoluted way, And when Crystal and I were talking about the work the other day, I actually heard myself saying to her, I beat these things into submission. I mean, I just layer them, and damn it, they're going to work. There's nothing casual about these at all. They take a lot of time and effort.
Yeah, going into that, and as we look at the next group of images, which is more of like seeing your process in your studio as it was. So describing your mental process as you go into each piece or each series of work, because I really liked when you said that you beat each one into submission.
I was being funny.
Yeah.
But I am, I do push it, I do push them very far, I don't seem to know how to make art any other way. It's just the way I am. Why don't we move on to the process? I have a bunch of process images of one particular piece, and of course the images are not as sharp as the professional shots, so I apologize for that. But and I'll show you the professional shot at the end. But with this particular piece, I started with burning patterns into balsa wood. And then I cut those into squares. And you can see on the right, I'm actually gluing them down.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm working with pattern on top of pattern. So we can go to the next. And then you can see it's all glued down. And then there's a detail. And so I found that, with these, with this patterning, as I moved ahead to the show that's up in the gallery now, I use that really as kind of scaffolding. I kind of use it to create my design. We can go on to the next image. So, and I'm sorry, this image on the right is not that clear, but you can see on the left, I'm staining the surface. And on the right, I had intended for this to be a piece of work based on trees and snow that I saw in Vermont, and I really gave it my go, but it took another turn. So anyway, I'm on the right. I'm starting to pipe medium onto the surface. We can go to the next. So here's pipe, and I just, I was doing this, and it. I wasn't sure about it, So on the top, I've filled in those areas. On the bottom, I'm putting the gray in there. So I'm starting to find my way through this piece. We can go to the next. So adding more. And I often feel very lost in these pieces until, I get towards the end where they start to make sense, We can go to the next. And then I'm staining the background on the top, and I'm adding some black because I'm deciding I'm not liking this. This is this is the point where I'm saying I'm not sure about this.
What are you staining? What do you stain it with?
I use acrylic, acrylic, and matte medium. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so on the bottom, I'm at this point where I'm saying I'm not so sure about this. This isn't feeling right to me. So I'm starting the covering process. So I'm great for doing all this work, spending all this time, and then covering it. So it's just kind of this visual push and pull in my work. I push it away, I bring it out, I push it away. I think we can go to the next. So I'm now covering the trees. And you can see a detail underneath. And at this point, you know, I'm really thinking about, you know, I really want the show, my solo show at Kingston, which opened in March and is still hanging there. I want it to be about checkerboards. And so this is the first piece that I did in that series. And how I thought that I was going to connect trees, I'm not really sure. I'm not sure, but it got me started. So anyway, let's go to the next slide. Yeah. So here I'm adding more to the surface. And, you know, gridding it out, adding my lines. And then I think we can go to the next. And then here I'm making my checkerboard. I often do an inversion, checkerboard is inversion assignment with my students, and it's always very interesting to me. And I decided to give myself that sort of archetype, design archetype to work with for my solo show. And so you can see that it's a checkerboard here. And I think we can go to the next image. And this is the professional image. This is the finished piece. You could see it's 12 inches by 36 inches. So it's a long, skinny piece. And here's the detail.
So Erica,
Hi.
hi. Is there no fabric in these? Because they look, of course, like fabric. But
There's
it's all
none.
paint?
There's
all
none. It's really just the squeezing out of the pastry bag over the background.
How thick is the paint when you're squeezing it out? I mean, is it?
It's, you know, it's almost like frosting.
Yeah.
You know, it feels like frosting, and then I pigment it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, Rachel, I stopped using fabric a while ago. I mean, I just, but yeah, you know, like I was saying before, yeah, they feel like they're more fabric based now than they did, you know, 20 years ago. But yeah, no, it's just the background and the medium.
Erica, have you thought about taking any like video of your work just for the documentation, just to see it? Like, I just want to see it come out of the bag.
Oh, I've thought about it. I haven't done it yet.
Yeah, I think
I'll add it to the list.
Yes, I think it needs it.
I agree.
Yeah, I'd like to put in a little comment that it would be wonderful to see that. I would find that very instructive, and it would go beautifully with what I'm seeing now.
Okay, I'll think about doing it. I just, you know, yeah. I mean, I started documenting. I document all my work as I'm working on it, because when I was teaching at Wheelock, we had a documentation center, and I sort of learned, you know, I take shots of, you know, all day long as I'm working on my work, but I don't have video. So that'll be the next thing for me to do. So I wanted just to show you the work for my show, Half Spaces. And what I did was in every piece, there is some kind of a checkerboard. And in this first one, the checkerboarding is actually the red and black under the surface. So I wanted, I wanted you to kind of go up and explore the work, which is something that's important to me. People often go up and look at the work, and people often ask me, how did you make this? And how much time did it take? So I spend a lot of time making sure that the materials are synthesized, so you're not really sure how it's made. You know, I work really hard on that ambiguity. So here's a detail. And I guess we can go to the next piece. If somebody wants me to slow down, I can, but, you know, and I, you know, when I'm working, I think a lot about, you know, a lot about all of the issues that abstract painters think about, you know, value, line, shape, layers, form, patterns of organization. You know, what's the overall pattern of organization? This is a big piece. This is 18 by 72 inches. And, you know, the pieces really, for me, represent time and balance for me, which are two things that really affect me as a person. I'm very time oriented. I'm very balance oriented. So I find that when I'm working on these pieces, I think we can go to the next image. here's a detail. When I'm working on these pieces, I'm thinking about, okay, I'm leaning over to the left. What's it going to get me to lean over to the right? You know, what's going to pull your eye over? So I think a lot about that. How is the work balanced? You know, am I relying on, you know, what am I relying on to get this piece done? You know, is the piece just about process? Is it more than process? That's something I think a lot about. And how is the work mine? You know, I think a lot about that too. So
I
in
see.
this, go ahead. No, I
Um,
was going to say that in this piece, I'm working with opposite
Yeah.
colors on the color wheel.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. I'm sorry. What were you going to ask me?
I was going to ask if the idea of balance in this piece was evident in the color choices with like the opposite colors.
Yeah, I was also thinking of them as opposites, like in checkerboard, and you have opposites. You have black and white, white and black. I was thinking of it that way. And this piece was really an interesting piece because it started, and this one actually, Rachel, this one actually has lace underneath. So I lied to you. This actually has lace underneath because I wanted it for the patterning, and I ended up covering it up. It didn't work for me. So yeah, this is the oddball in the whole show. So I've been thinking about lace for a long time, but it didn't really work in this piece. This is a small piece, and this is a piece that I completely reworked. I did it one way, you know, I did it, I thought it was finished, and then an artist friend of mine looked at it and said, it really is, you know, it's really bland. So I reworked it. And these pieces for this show, I allowed the wood to sort of hang off the edges so that they're slightly shaped. And that, of course, was very deliberate. Detail. And this piece, you know, I call landscape, and it's probably the only piece in the show that feels like a thing. It looks like a thing, you know, it kind of looks like a landscape. And it's I think it's a little bit different than the other pieces, but I really enjoyed doing it. I really enjoyed doing the sky, which I call sky, I don't know, the area to the right. But it felt a little different, and I wasn't really sure how I felt about it, you know, until I actually got it in the gallery. So you can see in the let's go back to the last one. I'm sorry. That left area is sort of a net. And, you know, years ago, before I started weaving again, I would make my own nets, you know, knotted nets, and glue them to the surface, which was my scaffolding. So I feel like I'm kind of returning to these shaped edges and these nets and the grids. It's like, it's all kind of it's all coming full circle. I think we can go to the next one. So this piece, this was the troubled child of the show. I had a hell of a time getting this piece finished. Couldn't get it to work. I just kept adding layer after layer after layer, and then finally it kind of, you know, it kind of pulled itself together. But this was tough. And, you know, my intention for this work was to show some of the burn pattern in the background. I wanted to show that. And this one, you can't see any of it. I mean, it's gone. There are a lot of layers there. I wanted to, you know, again, I'm, you know, I was sort of dealing with that sort of issue of, you know, why am I doing this if I'm going to cover it? You know, so this one really, really covered. And using, you know, these sort of opposite colors on the color wheel also allow me the opportunity to have real value shifts, which I think are, you know, very important in my work. This is the last piece. There are 7 pieces in the show. And this was the second one that I did after the process piece that I showed you. And in this one, there's a lot of shaped edges on this, and you see a lot of the burning on the background. I left quite a bit of it. If you look at the close-up, yeah, you can see a lot of the patterning in the background. And also playing around with, you know, the tight close areas where it's tightly piped out and more open areas. So I just have a couple shots, installation shots to show you. We're getting towards the end here. It was fairly sparsely hung. I always design for the space. The only thing that changed with this installation was the two small pieces got swapped, but the show is hung, you know, the way I designed it. Are there any questions at this point? Crystal, was there anything you wanted to ask me?
I forgot I was muted. You've kind of like, I want to know more of like what you were thinking about with the formal aspects, which you've really answered. And really my last question was just about your new studies that you're doing.
Okay.
So we can, you know, that's all I'm kind of thinking about.
Okay.
Oh, one little side question though. As I'm looking through this work, and it just kind of came to me, I think I'm going to mispronounce his name, but it reminds me of El Anatsui. He's from Africa.
Yeah. He's like the best. Yeah,
Okay.
I forgot about him. He's fantastic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think there's something at the MFA with him.
Oh yeah, yeah, I'm quite
yeah.
familiar. Yeah, and he, you know, he's building these beautiful surfaces with small parts.
Yeah, I just think of like all the small parts together.
Right, he's really coming at it from a textile tradition.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I have a question.
Yes.
Other people do. I guess, can you go to one of the slides where we see really a close-up detail? I'm looking at these and I see a sense of revealing and peeling.
Yeah.
You know, you talk about them as weaving, but the first time I saw them, I was always thinking about a skin, a covering, and then tears and revealing what's inside.
That's really interesting.
Do you think of any metaphors? Are you thinking in metaphors where you're working? I mean, conceptually, I'm just wondering, like, where is this taking? I mean, I understand there's a lot of process, and I really appreciate you talking about the process. But once you're done, are you thinking about them as, you know, torn fabric that reveals the background, or skin that's wounded and reveals, you know, the insides of a body? Or,
you know, it's funny, I haven't thought of them that way, but I think the sort of hiding and revealing definitely is something I think about.
Especially, I think your last work has a lot to do with, like, this particular one to me. Yeah, if you go to number 36, you know, this is mostly blue and gray, and then there are parts of it that is torn and kind of almost like damaged, and then you see what's underneath.
Right. It's funny, I never think of it of the word damage, which is interesting. I mean, you give me a lot to think about, but I definitely am thinking about hiding and revealing, and part of that is what brings people up to the work, because they want to explore. There's an exploring piece, and also myself as a person, I'm a big hider. It's very easy for me to escape. So yeah, I guess in that way I'm talking about myself. I don't necessarily think of the wounded piece, but that's very interesting, Chantal.
I have a comment to kind of build off of what Chantal was saying, a question and comment. I've spent a lot of time in old buildings, including my house, which is pretty old, and I do see this kind of reveal and you know, hiding, which I thought about, but I didn't actually like put those into words in my head.
Right.
It reminds me of like peeled wallpaper. You see all these layers and or paint. So have you ever thought about you know, making site-specific work?
I have.
Yeah.
I have actually. I've thought it would be interesting to take, I often like, you know, under bridges and that type of architecture where you have strong value shifts, or under stairwells. And I have thought about, you know, taking pictures and doing those. I have.
Shall we go on to your studies?
Sure.
Okay.
So, and these are, you know, I'm sorry, these are not great slides, but right now I'm working on these monochromatic studies because I'm interested in exploring mixing media a little bit more, where I'm actually showing the media. And I'm really at the very beginning of this. I'm not really sure where I'm going. And I like the idea of monochromatic because I would like the surfaces to be textured, but in the same color family, so that you're just aware of the texture. So here you can see the top right, there is lace. I'm working with the lace. And then the left side there, I'm using coffee cup holders, cardboard, and then printing on top of it with like little dots. So I'm finding my way through these. I'm not really quite sure yet where I'm going. And I am sort of thinking about, lower, higher, which kind of connects to Chantal's question a little bit more inside, outside, but I'm not sure. This is my COVID-19 work, And then this one, there's the white area, which is lace, and obviously it's not all monochromatic, but and thinking about, the pieces being a little bit more stark, maybe a little bit more immediate, maybe a little bit less refined. These are just words I'm thinking about in my head, but I'm not sure yet where I'm going. That's it. That's the last image.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I actually have one more question. So I was trying to talk and I was muted. I keep on doing that to myself. So what was the idea with the red? Because red has so many like cultural connotations.
Oh yeah, it's just a strong color, and I wanted it to be, and again, I'm not, I'm just getting into these. I'm not yet. Red has a lot of meanings. I'm aware of that. I just wanted it to be a strong, a strong color that would make you want to come up and look at it. I've been thinking about this for a while. I've been thinking also about, black on black, where it's almost, the value is so minute that the difference would be the shift in texture. But that's about as far as I am right now with this.
I keep wanting to see a transformation of these things into something else. So in other words, the printing idea, like if you rolled ink on this and put a piece of paper on top and then ran through a press, then you would look at it, you'd look at the plate and then you'd look at the drawing next to it. As juxtaposed.
So you'd show them together.
What comes out of that plate in another form.
Right. Yeah.
And then working on that form on the paper and deriving from that some meaning that's different from this. I don't know. It just seems like you have so many options to take this.
Well, I'm also thinking about, pressing impressions into it. I've had that in the back of my mind for a long time, when it's almost dry, not quite, pressing images into it and then painting in those depressed areas. But again, I'm just starting this, and I think that, the thought that keeps going through my head is that there's so many people mixed media, that how, what am I going to do? That's, how am I going to make this mine? How does this feel like me? How does it, and I think that's just because I'm at the beginning of this process. I'm not sure where this is going to end up.
Well, there's definitely a line of inquiry from your very beginning pieces to your show that's up now. It's a very consistent way of thinking and proceeding through some methodology. I really like some of the earlier pieces a lot, but that you woven pieces. I thought they were quite beautiful.
Thank you. I haven't looked at them in years. They're in storage, and
but I can see how you keep progressing very slowly but carefully through your process. And, it makes a pretty straight line. And, now I'm seeing that you're going off of that line into maybe something a little bit more unknown. And I kind of like that direction.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And I'm also feeling that way.
Mm-hmm.
I'm feeling like I'm ready for a little bit of a change.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure, and it's exciting and frustrating at the same time, it gives me a jumping off point when I actually move my studio.
Mm-hmm.
I'll have a jumping off point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Good.
Are there any questions or comments? Okay. Well, thank you.
Yeah, I think this went really well. We got through quite a few slides, but it was really just interesting to see the progression.
Thank you.
Yeah. So remember that we have our Artsy page. You can find Erica's work there. And Erica and Myra's show, it'll still be up. It's still up now. When we can safely open up, people can still view the work.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Crystal.
Yeah, thank you guys.